The squeeze. In Sydney, a nurse with a decade of experience can't afford to rent alone. In Melbourne, engineers in their 30s are moving back in with parents. In Brisbane, teachers are taking second jobs just to cover rent. This is Australia in 2025, where having a good job no longer guarantees financial security. In November 2025, inflation stood at 3.4%, still above the Reserve Bank's target range. The things Australians actually need, housing, electricity, food, are rising far faster. Electricity prices exploded after government rebates ended in October 2025. Bills surged 37% almost overnight. Rents have climbed 44% over the past 5 years. The median home now costs 8 times the average household income. Staples like bread, milk, and meat take larger bites out of weekly budgets every month. Australians are working harder, earning more nominally, but falling behind financially. And the distance keeps growing. The housing trap. Australia's housing crisis isn't just bad, it's historically unprecedented. The median dwelling price hit $985,900 nationally by late 2024. In Sydney, it's $1.4 million, the highest share since tracking began in 1996. The average Australian now needs 10.6 years to save a 20% deposit, far longer in expensive cities like Sydney. The market has shut out the middle class entirely. Only 14% of median income households can afford to buy a home today. In Sydney, just 10%. 3 years ago, 43% of households could afford to buy. Advertised rents surged 44% over 5 years, pushing the median payment to 33.4% of household income, well above the 30% threshold economists consider sustainable. For millions of Australians, this creates an impossible choice. Pay crushing rent with no path to ownership, or stretch financially to buy a home that consumes half your income for 30 years. The rate shock. Here's what many people outside Australia don't realize. The housing crisis got exponentially worse because of what happened to interest rates. During the pandemic, the Reserve Bank of Australia pushed rates to historic lows, near zero. Mortgages were cheap, Australians borrowed heavily, and home prices soared. Then inflation hit. Between May 2022 and November 2023, the RBA raised rates 13 times, taking the cash rate from 0.1% to 4.35%. Monthly mortgage payments suddenly jumped by hundreds, sometimes over $1,000. But here's the deeper problem. Homeowners who secured ultra-low rates during the pandemic can't sell and buy elsewhere without doubling their mortgage payments. It's a vicious cycle where rate hikes designed to cool the market actually make affordability worse. For renters watching from the sidelines, the message is clear. Even if you could scrape together a deposit, the interest rates would make ownership unaffordable anyway. The trap has multiple layers and escape routes keep disappearing. The business collapse. Australian businesses are failing at rates not seen since the early 1990s recession. In the 2024-25 financial year, nearly 15,000 companies entered insolvency, a 33% increase from the previous year. Monthly insolvency activity in March 2025 hit the highest level on record, surpassing even the peak during the global financial crisis. New South Wales led the nation with over 4,600 company failures. Victoria and Queensland followed with thousands more. No state escaped the wave. The construction sector bore the worst of it. Major builders like Porter Davis Homes collapsed, leaving homeowners with unfinished projects and billions in unpaid debts. Hospitality faced its own crisis. 1 in 10 food and beverage businesses closed in the year to June 2025. The Australian Restaurant and Cafe Association warned, it's no longer a question of if hospitality businesses will fail, but which ones will close next. Work from home culture gutted CBD foot traffic. Tourism remains below 2016 levels. Rising wages, rents, and energy costs crushed already thin margins. The wage cost gap. Here's the fundamental problem. Costs are rising faster than incomes. Australia has avoided recession, and unemployment remains relatively low, around 4%. That's the good news. The bad news? Wage growth, while positive, hasn't kept pace with the rising cost of essentials. Between 2020 and 2025, Median household income rose roughly 4 to 5% annually. Australians have more dollars in their pockets nominally. A salary increase that would have felt meaningful 5 years ago now barely covers the increased cost of rent, utilities, and groceries. Australia's productivity growth has lagged behind global peers. The National Australia Bank and Reserve Bank have both warned that without stronger productivity improvements, wage growth will struggle to catch up with inflation over the long term. The geographic divide. Australia's size creates an additional pressure. Geographic inequality. Australia is massive but hyper-urbanized. Most jobs, opportunities, and infrastructure cluster in a handful of expensive cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth. Sydney's median house price sits at $1.4 million. To afford that, a household needs to earn approximately $280,000 annually. For renters, median weekly costs exceed $560. Yet Sydney is also where most high-paying jobs, career advancement opportunities, and economic activity concentrate. For young Australians especially, this geographic trap reinforces the broader affordability crisis. You can't escape high costs by moving somewhere cheaper, because cheaper places no longer exist, at least not with comparable job markets. The generational divide. The housing crisis doesn't affect all Australians equally. It's created a sharp generational divide. Home values climbed roughly 50% since early 2020, adding hundreds of thousands of dollars to median dwellings. For those who already owned, this felt like wealth creation. Surveys show that only half of current renters expect to ever own a home in their lifetime. That's a profound shift in expectations. A generation ago, home ownership was the default assumption. Today, it's an increasingly distant aspiration. This generational inequality feeds resentment, disengagement, and questions about whether Australia's economic model still works for everyone. The future void. Young couples delay having children because raising a family while paying $600 plus weekly rent feels impossible. Professionals in their 30s realize they'll likely never own homes despite doing everything right: degrees, careers, saving diligently. The social contract that defined Australian prosperity for generations has quietly dissolved. Work hard, get educated, buy a home, build equity, retire comfortably. Each link in that chain has weakened or broken entirely. Financial anxiety doesn't stay confined to spreadsheets and bank accounts. It seeps into mental health, relationships, and life decisions. Talented workers emigrate to countries where home ownership remains achievable. Families fracture under financial stress. When electricity bills spike 37%, when rents consume a third of income, when saving for a deposit takes over a decade, when businesses collapse at record rates, when interest rate hikes trap existing owners while shutting out new buyers. Daily life doesn't just get harder. It starts to feel rigged. The Reserve Bank can't cut rates without risking inflation. The government can't flood the market with housing overnight. Wages can't suddenly jump 40% to match housing costs. Businesses can't absorb endless cost increases. Every solution that might help also carries risks that could make things worse. So what happens next? What happens when an entire generation accepts they'll never own homes? What happens when small business failures accelerate? What happens when the wealth gap between property owners and renters becomes unbridgeable? What happens when a developed, wealthy country can no longer promise its people that hard work leads to security? Australia hasn't answered these questions yet, but it's running out of time to figure it out.